Good afternoon to you all. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Joe Carroll. I'm Head of Profession Development at Chartered Accountants Ireland, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to today's session on Beyond Management, the Leadership Edge. And this is a taster, really, of what you can expect on our new Executive Leadership Programme, which we'll be delivering with the Queen's University Business School in 2026. And today's session we're scheduled to run for about an hour, finishing at 1:30. And of course, like if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat below. We'll pick them up as many as we can as we go through today's session. Why now? I suppose we'll start with a big question. Leadership today, I think, is no longer just about managing tasks. It's about inspiring people, shaping strategy, driving impact in a world that's changing faster than ever. We've often kind of heard that before, but I think when you think about how AIs and digital disruption are reshaping industries, the hybrid working model, and then shareholders, our colleagues, our employers, their expectations around trust, transparency, are at levels that I don't think we've seen before. So taking all these things on board, we believe that for a lot of people in organization, leadership capability is a strategic differentiator. And with that in mind, that's why we've developed this program. You'll also know that as an organization, our, I suppose, mission, our North Star is that it's about trusted business leadership. Uh, so the trust and the leadership being really, really important there. And it's with those challenges in mind that we've developed the Executive Leadership Program, which will, over a 4-month period, what I think is a uniquely blended experience of online, in person in both Dublin and Belfast, will help you explore about leading yourself, leading others, leading the organisation, and equipping you to navigate uncertainty, lead change, and build that all important trust. And this taster session will, I think, give you a glimpse of that journey and give you practical insights too that you can apply immediately. And now to bring this to life, I'm delighted to be joined by someone who I think embodies leadership education at its best, and that's Dr. Louise O'Mara, who is Programme Director at Queen's University Business School. Louise is an experienced educator, executive coach with a strong track record of developing senior leaders across sectors. And Louise will guide us through what it takes to lead with confidence in a complex, fast-changing world. Louise, over to you.
Thank you very much, Joe. And as Joe said, my name is Louise O'Mara. I work at the Clinton Leadership Institute. We're the executive education branch of Queen's Business School. And our mission, as you see here on our slide, is to empower and develop leaders and future generations of leadership to create positive social and economic impact for a better world. So a very we might say noble, a very high flying mission, and a program like this that we're developing in collaboration with Chartered Accountants Ireland is very much at the sort of the centre of what we do. And as Joe said, I've been with the Institute for about 6 years, where my role as Programme Director has me design and deliver all sorts of both bespoke and open leadership programmes, targeting senior and often middle level leaders, and helping people to think about how they lead, how we inspire change, how we deal with the complexities that we're charged with addressing in the world today. So rather than talk about what we're going to be doing in this program, we reckoned it might be nice just to give you a taste. So in that sense, today's session is a taster, and we've got a couple of objectives for our time together. So the objectives are to explore the concepts of leadership and management. To begin, I would say, to begin to explore them, to open them up and see what they mean to us. And then to be introduced to a particular leadership framework. It's quite a high level leadership framework, but one that I think is very interesting in terms of suggesting some of the areas of focus we need to be paying attention to when we think about leadership. And we'll also create an opportunity for you to use that in a light touch way, but to do a little bit of assessment in terms of your leadership practice. Let me move on or let us move on then to the question of what is leadership. And I'm going to ask you to take a moment to think about this question for yourself. So when I say it's interactive. I would like you to actually take a whole 30 or 40 seconds out of this busy day. And for you, think about this question. What is the difference between leadership and management? Like what, and I'm not speaking really theoretically as much as practically in your lived experience. What do you see as the essential differences between leadership and management? Or indeed, I might ask, to what extent do you see differences or do you see overlap? So is suggesting that leadership is around the bigger picture. So that's kind of interesting. Um, Inspiration versus delegation. So that's interesting. So there's something around, and I'm assuming, Kieran, that it's the leadership is the inspiration bit. So inspiring people rather than telling people. So I think I think that's a significant sort of duality in a sense. Future think. So leadership suggests is about future thinking, whereas management is the more day to day. Leadership is doing and setting an example. So when we know the language, to walk the talk. So thinking, leading by example, we often talk about leadership should be inspiring. Management refers to managing the day-to-day operations of the organization, whereas leadership takes a look at better ways of doing things. So there's a little bit of implicit change, a little bit of development, a little bit of striving for something better or growing or developing. And again, a number of people about speaking about inspiring people. Leadership does, management directs. So interesting. So leadership, again, that idea of the what, and then maybe management being more about the how. Leadership is empowering, management is delegation and achievement of goals. Nice. Setting direction is associated with leadership, whereas management is more about arranging the journey. What a nice way of putting it. A strategic mindset. I'm thinking that that's kind of the leadership piece, and it's part of reading the bigger picture that we started off this conversation with. Leadership is most important. Many can manage, but not everyone can lead. So that's kind of interesting. Um, Leadership is strategic and management is about practical steps to achieve that strategy. So some very sort of clear messages coming out around the leadership and management piece. I'd like to play a short little video clip of a guy, some of you, I'm sure many of you will have heard of John Cotter, Professor Emeritus in Harvard Business School, who is very well known for his work on leadership and particularly leadership and change. But he has some interesting things to say about leadership and management and how they are similar and how they are different. So just bear with me while I share this video clip. Have a listen to this and see what you make of this.
Management and leadership are often used as synonyms. That is to say, people don't even notice that in one sentence they're saying one, in one sentence they're saying another, and they're thinking the same thing, whatever it is. Or they think that the guys on top do leadership, whatever that is, and the guys in the middle or lower do management. Both are wrong, both are dangerous, and both are increasingly a problem in a world that's changing faster and faster. Let me explain. Management has, believe it or not, mostly been invented in the last century as we've created these modern things that we take for granted, large-scale organizations. And it is about a set of processes that make something function, despite the fact that it can be in multiple locations, many people, complicated products, and function in a way that if you talked to somebody even 200 years ago, they would have told you you can't do that. You can't have this many people in this many places producing this complicated stuff and make it all work. Well, you can. and we've invented it, and it's called management. And it has parts associated with planning, parts associated with budgeting, parts associated with organizing people, staffing the jobs correctly, parts associated with measurements and controls, and big pieces associated with smart problem-solving techniques when action goes off of plan. Now, that is not what leadership is. If you go down through history and look at people who everyone talks about as a great leader, they don't talk about that stuff. They talk much more about vision. They talk much more about people believing in, buying into that vision, often through various methods of communication. They talk a lot about energy and empowerment and motivation and inspiration. And if you ask yourself, well, what if management kind of runs this organization that shouldn't be able to function, it's too big, it's too spread out, it's too complicated. What leadership tends to do, it tends to be much more at the heart of creating things in the first place or changing them in significant ways to take advantages of opportunities or to duck hazards or to take a group and literally the same people, getting them to behave in new and different ways that produce much better outcomes. Now, the problem today is that most of the time, when we talk about either management or leadership, we're really talking about management. If you look at business schools, including the one that I've grown up with and spent my entire life in Harvard Business School, and you look at their curriculum, it's almost always all about management. Literally 95%, maybe 5% about leadership. Now, there's nothing wrong with that because people need to understand these managerial processes, and for most people early in their careers, if they can't master that stuff, they get themselves into trouble. But here's the rub. The world is moving faster. Increasingly, organizations have to keep up with that speed. Increasingly, they need to change, and therefore, increasingly, they need people who can provide leadership, and not just at the top, but in the middle, and even young people doing projects or being the head of a task force at lower levels. And if you don't understand that they are different, the function they serve, and why the leadership piece is more important, and also why it's not that one is good and one is bad, which you hear sometimes. Leadership is great, management's bad, but that they're both important. It's just a matter of one piece is growing in importance and we don't have it. If you don't understand that, it's a real liability these days.
So, folks, that is Mr. Cotter on his take, if you like, on leadership and management and the distinction between them. So, I have a slide here that, if you like, just summarizes really that summarizes his key points, and you'll see the read across between the points you were making in the chat and this. So really it's management he describes as making sure what is supposed to happen happens now, happens on time, happens within various constraints and policy guidelines. So it is essentially around the budgeting, the production, the measuring, all those management things. And insofar as it can be, it is around sort of consistency. So many of you talked in the chat about the implementation piece. It's achieving what we set out to achieve, and that of course takes the staffing and the performing and the measuring and all those things. Leadership, Cotter is saying, on the other hand, is making sure what isn't necessarily going to happen happens. So leadership is more about creating, and we might say co-creating, a sense of the vision, a sense of strategic direction, a sense of the future that we're about. So so in a sense, it's about, and many of you, I think the first comment in response to what was the difference between leadership and management was it's about seeing the big picture, and that is about the setting strategic direction piece. Reading the bigger picture, reading the market, reading what's happening in your field, in your sector, and then thinking about what do we need to do to be able to operate and operate successfully within that. And of course, to do that, it is around, we can't really command people to get behind a vision. So what we do is we try to inspire people. And again, many of you use the inspiring word. We try to inspire people, we try to motivate people, we try to convince people, we try to influence people to get behind that vision, that sense of direction. Call it what you will, the overarching purpose. And that's why, of course, there's a link between setting a strategic direction, setting a vision. The more we have an ability to jointly co-create those, the easier it will be to get people to buy in and get behind them and work to implement them. So the engagement, the empowerment, the relationships, I mean, that's what it takes. And again, we often talk about leaders, in leadership, we need to know our people, we need to build relationship and rapport with people. And it's all to that end of being able to convince and get people behind the direction of travel. The other thing that Cotter alludes to is that idea that it is around change. It's essentially around change. Leadership is never about it's going okay. Let's just keep it at that. There is inherently in it a change motive that is to do it better, to do more of it. So in a sense, there is a future orientation, and sometimes we talk about the need in leadership to take risks, and I think that's true. When we create or co-create a vision and try and get people to get behind that vision, we are talking about something that doesn't yet exist. We're talking about something in the future. So there is a bit of risk in saying, let's go there. Let's follow that vision. Let's work to achieve that because we cannot be 100% sure that when we get there, that it will give all that or yield all that we thought it would. So in a sense, the risk piece is always there, and the change piece. So that's just a bit of a summary, really, of Cotter's key points. And the reason I wanted to bring him into the conversation today was to really highlight a couple of points that he makes that I think we won't have time to discuss today, but I'd certainly like to pose these questions today. For you to take away and ruminate on, because I think they're very important questions. He says we need leaders at all levels. So that's kind of that's an interesting idea it's a little bit different to we need leaders at the top of the organization. He's saying something a little bit different. So I think we could do well to think about why are leaders needed at all levels, and how do we encourage this, and to what extent in your experience have you seen it? Do you see it in the companies you work in now? Have you seen it in previous ones? So I offer this merely as a reflection point, rather than us having time to talk about it now. The other very interesting point from Cotter is his case is that is in his experience, organizations tend to be overmanaged and underled. So I think that's interesting to think about. Actually, just theoretically, it's interesting to think about the idea of the difference of what it means. What's the impact of overmanaging and underleading or not? And of course, with any of these questions, to bring them back to our own workplace and indeed our own practice. So we might ask ourselves, so what's the balance like in my organization or even in my part of the organization? If you're in a big organization, in my department, what's the balance like between leading and managing? Which do we do more of, and what are the implications of that? Is the balance healthily appropriate, or actually do we need to reshift it a little bit? I think it's also an interesting question in terms of our own practice. So I can ask myself, so what's my balance like? Do I lean into more managing or leading? And to think about what are the implications of that for me, for people I work with, for the organization, for my team. So again, as I say, questions more to take away um, with you and think about. And of course, yeah, we can talk, Joe, I'm sure will say a little bit more about the program at the end. These are the kinds of these questions I think would run throughout a whole leadership program. I mean, I think these questions are always up for us. If we're playing a management role or a leadership role, they'll always be live because we need to pay attention to them. So I'm going to leave that there and well, leave it there, but move from it into saying, well, okay, let's focus a little bit more then on leadership and what we mean by leadership. So let me move on then to this model. I want to share with you this. It's a framework really of leadership. I would say that in the Clinton Leadership Institute, we spent some time looking for, like, we work with quite a wide variety of organizations and businesses. So we've got a big client base. We work with the private sector, the public sector, the not-for-profit sector, um, and very different kinds of organizations. It's SMEs, multinationals, family-owned businesses, really all sorts. So we wanted some kind of an overarching architecture, some way of thinking about leadership that spoke to the very different contexts we work in. So we were very pleased to come across this model, this framework called Direction, Alignment and Commitment. And it's from a paper by Drath et al. Called Direction, Alignment, Commitment Towards a More Integrative Ontology of Leadership. I will say, it's quite the academic paper. It's a tough enough read, but we've sort of, I suppose, synopsized it. And this is, if you like, our understanding. So let me share a little bit with you of what this leadership framework says, and then you'll have an opportunity to apply it in a quite a sort of a practical way to a team or an organization that you're involved in. So what do Drath et al. Say about leadership? The first thing they say is that leadership is a social process. So that's their opening sort of ambit, really. And that it is about enabling individuals to achieve things that could not be achieved by people working on their own. So it's a social process, they say, that involves the production of three outcomes: direction, alignment, and commitment. So direction, we would say, is where you've got agreement in the slides you're talking about in the group, in the organization, in the department, in the team, but agreement on the overall goals, that overall direction of travel, the overall strategic direction. Different people will use sort of different terminology there. But it's really it's agreement on what we are trying to achieve together collectively. So when we have that direction, when we have alignment, now by alignment in this context, they mean alignment is around how the work is organized, how people and how roles and responsibilities are assigned and understood, etc. So where you've got that kind of coordinated sort of synergy, where different parts of the system or the organization work well together and work in light of what the others are doing, where you've got that good level of alignment, and where you have commitment. So commitment is more around people have a sense of mutual responsibility for the work of the group or the team or the organization. And we might say that people put their own advancement, or they put the advancement or the achievement of the direction is their main driver over and above just their own personal success. So what Drath et al. Says, when you have these three outcomes present, they say that is leadership. So it's about the production of the three outcomes. And I would say, like there are a couple of reasons we particularly, like this model of or this way of thinking about leadership. It's a very high level framework, and so many of your favorite, theories, approaches to leadership will fit within this. It's a very broad brush stroke, but it suggests to us it's a move away from the more leader as hero, and actually that leadership is less about the individual leader as and more about leadership and about people working together to produce these outcomes. So one of the reasons, there are a number of reasons we like it. We like that this opens up the idea of the many can play a role in leadership rather than the few. Because once I make a contribution to the production of direction, once I support the production of alignment or the production of commitment, I am in effect supporting the production of leadership, to use their language. So it opens up the idea of leadership. It takes it out of the realm of just being about the individual and more about something that the many can play into. Interestingly, I think it mirrors that idea that Cotter has around we need leadership at all levels. So again, it's a move away from that sort of more top-down command and control approach. We also like it because it helps us in a world where the organizational structures, many still tend to be hierarchical at some level. There is much more emphasis on agile working, on working in teams, in that idea of teams or networks of teams. And so those kinds of organizational structures that need for greater agility, for speed, for more autonomous teams, that chimes very well, or that this way of thinking about leadership really chimes in that context. Um, so a couple of more things to say about these. So it's interesting that the leadership piece is, if you like, in the overlap of these three. So we would say that these three domains or these three elements are interdependent. If we were to think of this as a three-legged stool, the thing doesn't fly if one of the legs is broken. So you need all three. Now these are quite conceptual, but to sort of disaggregate them, how might you tell if direction in an organization was strong? What might you notice if direction is strong? If there is an agreement on the overarching direction of travel for the team or the organization? What are some of the indicators you might see? So consistent messaging. Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting to know whether would, if you asked your team, or if there was a question put to the organization, would people all have the same message? Would people be able to say what the vision or the overarching direction is? Yeah, and I'm seeing other sort of clear objectives. And again, that people share. I think the really important word that I would underline in this slide here is agreement. So direction isn't just that there is a vision, there is a strategy. It's like that there's agreement, and that's really a significant piece. The word is small, but the amount of work we need to do as leaders to build those kinds of agreements is quite significant. So I think it's sort of worth pointing out. Yeah, I'm seeing comments here. Everyone is on the same page. People understand the message, and I would build on that and say people understand and agree on the message. And that ability to easily articulate those high level, that sense of where we're heading is really quite important. Um, when it's not happening, if direction is poor, what might you notice? What might um, what might you see? What might you hear? Couple of you are suggesting confusion. Absolutely. So there could be a lack of agreement on priorities, and you can and the mixed messaging, indeed. Um, And that sense maybe of people feeling that they're being pulled in different directions and people aren't quite sure, "But are we going here or are we going here?" So that sort of dissonance can really, contradictory goals, indeed. Yeah, contradictory goals is a good way of putting it. Or maybe a bit of inertia, people running in circles because there isn't that sense of actually what the end goal is or might be. If we look at alignment, then, where we're saying that the work is, well organized and it's coherent, that roles and responsibilities are clear and understood, and that somebody has given thought to how the different elements work well together. Again, a question, like what would it look like if commitment is poor? What might you see? What might you notice? Well, let's start, sorry, not commitment, alignment. Let's start with if alignment is strong, what would you see? If the work is coherent, well put together, well thought through, roles and responsibilities are appropriate and understood, how might that show up, if you like? Well, Anna's saying enthusiasm. Yeah. 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 I mean, we might associate enthusiasm with commitment, but I think it's absolutely driven by clarity around roles that the work makes sense. And the goals are being met, and there's efficiency, and there's good outcomes and buy-in. So it's interesting when people feel that the work is well organized. When I'm clear about your role and you're clear about mine, like that sense of everyone being clear, that really helps people actually achieve what they want to achieve, but also gives people a sense of the confidence in it. And I think that's kind of the enthusiasm that people talk about. And that you'll see that the work of my group fits well with the work of others. It's you don't have people working at cross purposes, um, because when the alignment aspect is weak, you might ask, so what do you see when the alignment is weak? Well, when the alignment is weak, you'll see there can be a sense of sort of disarray, maybe people missing deadlines, maybe feeling a little bit isolated from each other, doing my bit, but not really clear where it fits with others. So there isn't that kind of synchronicity that would lead to enthusiasm in a sense. You might even, where the alignment is poor, you might even see groups working against each other. People very much into our bit, solo runs, yes, solo runs, absolutely. So people doing their own thing, maybe even teams doing their own thing. And I imagine that most of us on this call can think of at least some time in our professional lives when we have seen in organizations where different parts of the organizations not only aren't working well together, actually seem to work a little bit at odds with each other. And yet the territorial word, I think, is very apt there, and silos indeed. The commitment aspect, then this third piece, so this is really about like the mutual responsibility, when people make the success of the collective the priority more than their own individual success. And again, a question for you. What are some of the things you might see, you might notice if commitment is strong in the team, in the organization? What might be some indicators of strong commitment? Okay, so the efficiency word comes up again. So yeah, yeah, nice. A willingness to go the extra mile, absolutely. So I've my bit done, but actually we're all in this together. So my bit is not so helpful a way of thinking about it because it's our work. So that collective piece, I think, is really significant. And also, I suppose, what else have we got? Like you lower staff turnover, which is a great indicator of people having that sense. It's almost the affective sense of feeling a sense of belonging and commitment and like going the extra mile, and really thinking about how we can get the job done rather than just me. It's a less, sometimes people will talk about the commitment bit being a less tangible in the sense of you can't kind of touch it maybe or point to it so easily. But boy, do we know when it's not there. Like when it's strong, we'll have that sense of trust, that sense of that mutual accountability and trust, which of course are important for all sorts of Well, for all sorts of reasons, but primarily because they feed people in a sense in the workplace, and really drive motivation and drive the commitment. And then, of course, the yeah, I'm seeing that positivity, that great culture, that shoulder to the wheel approach. They're all part of the commitment, and we know as leaders and managers why it is so important to encourage and build those kinds of things. When commitment is low, I mean, you can just see the default of people just doing the easy things, the obvious things, maybe just that attitude of what's in it for me, as opposed to, what do we need to do? So interesting. We can, in a sense, it's the flip of many of the things, the demotivation, absolutely. And I'm sure we know the difference between going in for a day's work, even if you're busy, if you're under pressure and stressed, but the difference of going in to do that work with a gang of people that you feel committed to, that you feel have your back and you have theirs, is very different to going in to work with a group of people where you feel there isn't trust, you're keeping the head down, doing your own thing, and where there isn't that, we talk about psychological safety, where there isn't psychological safety. So we can very readily, while those things aren't always as easy to put our fingers on, when they're absent, we really see the impact of that. So um, uh, as I said, it's quite a conceptual way of with a framework. But we can see already that there is a sort of an interdependence between these three elements. So if you have got a clear sense of direction and good commitment, even if the alignment is poor, you can work on that, because strength in two of these domains will shore up a weaker third, in a sense, and give you an opportunity to strengthen it. And of course, as many of you have already been alluding, strength in one, like clarity in the alignment bucket, we'll call it, clarity and roles and responsibilities really drives a good sense of trust, and the opposite is the case where roles and responsibilities are unclear or misunderstood. It can really lead to relationship breakdown and a poor sense of trust, and people being at odds with each other because she didn't do that and he didn't do the other, and people are like not getting on, and feeling discombobulated. But actually, when you dive back, I know this as a consultant working with teams and organizations over the years, the first thing I would often do is, in working with a team, is get out a blank sheet of flip chart paper, being the old-fashioned girl I am, and just say, okay, so who does what on the team? I mean, so often a simple question like who does what in this team can unearth all sorts of confusion and lack of communication and such. So and that's what can drive poor relationship, which of course really affects the commitment. So even though we look at direction, alignment, and commitment sort of conceptually as three different things, they are very interwoven and they're very interdependent. But I think that's coming up already in the conversation. Um, One other thing, so I want moving to asking you to apply this to uh, your own situation. But first, I just want to say one other thing. So it's quite a high level conceptual framework. Um, where do some of the other things that we talk about in relation to leadership fit in this framework? So one thing we might say is that for all of us, I would imagine we are tasked at some level with the achievement of results. Um, Now we would say that these leadership outcomes of direction, alignment, and commitment really impact on those results. It's a kind of a no-brainer. If you've got direction, we're agreed on where we're going, we know how we're going to get there, we're well organized, and we've the work planned, and we're clear on roles and responsibilities, and people are committed to that and committed to supporting each other mutually to achieve it. If you've got those three things in place, well, we'll say job done, maybe not quite job done, but there's a lot done, and you can see how that will absolutely impact on the results. So what drives those? So we would say, and Drath et al. In their paper say that leadership processes and practices generate those outcomes of direction, alignment, and commitment. So leadership practices, how people treat each other, how people talk to each other, the quality of the relationships, all those things generate direction, alignment, and commitment, or not, as the case may be. So those leadership processes and practices in turn are influenced by a number of things. So again, I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but just to show where they fit. So beliefs and values, and Drath et al. In their paper, they talk about over time as we work together to produce direction and alignment and commitment, we begin to develop sort of beliefs and values about how to do that so that the values become really important. So values of things like the value of listening to people, the value, I would say, of being curious that was mentioned earlier, or belief in the importance of that. The value of treating people with respect, the idea of no one of us is as smart as all of us, all those sorts of beliefs and ideas make their way into the leadership practices. They influence, they create those leadership practices, which in turn generate or don't direction, alignment, and commitment. Other influences, the quality of relationships. Leadership is a relational business. And all those tourisms about you need to know your people, you need to be in relationship. Yes, and this is why. It's because you can't really command people. You are trying to encourage, support, persuade, motivate, influence, and that's all relational business. Formal structures and procedures also influence leadership practices, and they can influence them well or not. I mean, I often think of something like collaboration, where we really encourage people to collaborate. And we say that it's good and useful thing to do, but often our end of year procedures, our appraisals, may not reward collective endeavor at all, rather individual effort. So it's an example where you can have a formal structure or procedure that actually works a little bit counter to what you're trying to do in terms of your leadership practice. And then, of course, there's informal routines. We're generally known as culture, or how we do things around here. And again, the culture really does affect the leadership practices. But Drath et al. Would say the more we engage in practices that produce direction, alignment, commitment, that actually we begin to, the beliefs about that become part of the culture. So it's a sort of a mutually reinforcing. So this is all to say that these are how other aspects that we routinely talk about in terms of leadership, about values and culture and such, how they play into leadership practices which generate these three broad outcomes. Is it all about leadership? I mean, no, there are other things, of course, that will impact the results. You get the wider environment in which you're operating, global tariffs or climate change at very high level, and all sorts of other more local issues will, of course, impact the level and nature of results you can achieve, as will how much resource you have, as will how good or how well thought through and worked out your business strategy is. So they all play in. But of course, I suppose the bit we're more interested in really is the leadership piece. On this final slide for me, folks, just a couple of suggestions of ways to, and I'm conscious that we're up against the clock, so yeah, but so ways to build direction, ways to build alignment, ways to build commitment. So in terms of direction, things like develop a set of goals that people buy into, and make sure people can articulate what success looks like, help everyone to understand the role they play in achieving the goals. That's not always an easy thing to do. You mightn't even be able to answer that question yourself, but actually to sit down with somebody and say, let's figure out how your bit contributes, is a very useful leadership thing to do. In terms of alignment, some of the things, be a role model for collaboration with your peers, coordinate key activities with other groups. So show people that we're not going to discuss this until we know what that other part of the system or the organization is doing. Establish clear roles and responsibilities. Commitment, make time for team members to connect with each other to really build that mutuality. Create a psychologically safe environment. Show empathy and build trust. Folks, all the stuff on this slide is stuff that, of course, we could and will spend a lot of time thinking about because there is a lot on that slide. But just to say that there are some very simple and practical ways that we can go about developing direction, alignment, and commitment. But our time is up and over. I'm going to go back to Joe. Joe, back to you to close us out.
Thank you very much, Louise. That was a really insightful session. At the start, we said that leadership is no longer optional. I think it's a strategic advantage. And what you've had today is a taster, well, just a glimpse of the executive leadership program that's ahead. And we think that that will offer a structured, practical journey to help you lead with confidence and impact. Thank you very much again on behalf of myself, Chartered Accountants Ireland. Thanks for your time. Thank you for your engagement. Really pleased with all the questions, and look forward to seeing you at a future course or event. And wishing you a lovely afternoon ahead. Thank you.
Bye all.